Greetings. This will be a video regarding the upcoming solar eclipses of September of 2025 and February of 2026 and how they're inversely married to the solar eclipses of 1985 and 1986. Note the mirroring symmetry of both of these solar eclipses when looking at them side by side. And I do feel that the geophysical events that followed back in 1985 and 86, we may see a reflection and a similarity of earthquakes that follow in the years ahead, in 2026 through 2028. We're now going to go through the solar eclipse of September of 2025. I'm just going to animate the software. We can see that the moon shadow is coming out across Norfolk Island, Vanuatu, and then the moon shadow extends through the New Zealand region and then slowly moves southward. Now it looks fairly similar to a previous solar eclipse, and I'll show that shortly. I'll just show this again. And I'll pause it right when we see the initial phase, second phase of the moon shadow coming through. So it extends out just south of Vanuatu, New Caledonia, around Norfolk Island, just around Norfolk Island, and then starts to extend out through the Comatics and then across all of New Zealand and then stretches further away and then south. I'll now show another solar eclipse that's very similar to this and why I'm concerned. We're now looking at the 1986 solar eclipse. It was also a partial, and I found it quite interesting as it represents potentially the inverse opposite to what we have in 2025. I'll just now animate the software and I'll show why I'm thinking this. It's actually beginning on the opposite side, so it's in reverse. But note how we have it coming up south on the opposite side. Instead of coming out through New Zealand, it's coming out through Australia. And then it ends right there. Now for me, this is the inverse opposite to the previous. I'll now flick through the start and end of both eclipses and show the symmetry, 2025 and 1986. This is the upcoming solar eclipse, and this is a previous solar eclipse to the 1986. Now I'm going to animate the software. We're going to see something quite interesting here. So the moon shadow is coming across around the East Pacific Rise, extending out towards South America and Chile, coming down through and across New Zealand and then snapping back, heading inward. And see how it snaps through. And I'm attributing this solar eclipse, I'll just show it again, to the Tennant Creek earthquakes that we've got in 1988. So that's 3 years later. So again, it's coming out, seemingly coming out through New Zealand, then snapping back. And we're getting this very interesting finishing up underneath Australia. Now if we have a look at the upcoming 2026 solar eclipse, it's very similar to this, almost the next step in movement. So here we are, this is February 2026, and we can actually see it coming through the opposite side. South of New Zealand is coming right underneath New Zealand and then snapping back through Australia again. So I feel that this is very dynamic and very similar. We're just looking at the termination point where the moon shadow was about to re-enter and the completion of the solar eclipse of 2026 and also 1985, and look at their similarities. And as I mentioned, there was an earthquake just south of New Zealand around the Macquarie Ridge, and that was an 8.2 magnitude. And we may get something again underneath Australia, probably west of the Macquarie Islands, of significance, potentially around the same magnitude in the next few years. This is a very interesting symmetry. Just looking back at both of these solar eclipses, they do seem to be the inverse opposite or the mirror reflection of each other. And we see that the 1985 and 1986 are a representation of the 2025 and 2026. That's my opinion, and I feel that this may be an indication of some strong events to come. Now we have a look at Australia, because the initial 1985 solar eclipse was focused on the Australian side, while the upcoming solar eclipse of September of 2025 is focused away from Australia. But you can actually see that it's coming out of Australia and the inverse opposite is going into. So we get this very interesting symmetry there. Now the earthquakes in Australia, yes, we had a 5.6 magnitude in Newcastle in 1989, but we also had a 5.8 magnitude earthquake in Marat Creek, which is in South Australia. There was a 7.4 magnitude in the South Pacific Ocean, which is just south of Australia. And we had the 3 major earthquakes in Tennant Creek all within 24 hours, 6.3, 6.4 and 6.7 on the same day, January 22nd. So there's quite a lot of earthquakes for Australia, and I do feel that both of these solar eclipses were very strong foreshadows for these events. And I do feel that these eclipses are mirrored to each other or married to each other in terms of not the Saros cycle but the reflection data that I'm looking at. Now if we have a look at what happened on the New Zealand side, we had a 6.1 earthquake in the Fiordland region in 1988. 1989, the Macquarie Ridge earthquake, magnitude 8.2, extremely large earthquake south of New Zealand. We had a 5.2 earthquake in the Bay of Plenty, but also a 6.3 magnitude near Edgecombe. So we can see that there are some strong earthquakes on both sides, and I do feel that we may see the same symmetry again over the next 2 to 3 years. I'm going to show the solar eclipse with astrocartography as well as the animation and show the very interesting symmetry that's showing themselves. Now the astrocartography is showing the sun and moon position. We see the sun just hidden behind the moon at the start of the eclipse. The house is actually localizing and centralizing the software at 29 degrees south latitude. And from the chart we actually can see a 17-degree slant or angle or orientation of the node. Importantly, the node we can see visually with astrocartography, and with the software for the solar eclipse for September, we can actually see a line marking the nodal line. And the initial start of the solar eclipse, we can actually see the moon shadow appearing on the Earth right at the start of the eclipse in this location where I have the house with astrocartography. Now what's interesting is the Sun and Saturn have just gone through their opposition just prior to the solar eclipse starting. But if we have a look at the orientation of the node itself at 17 degrees, I feel that you can actually see that the node's moving very slowly across, whereas in the solar eclipse, if we just animate the software, the node moves quite quickly across. So it's moving virtually every second across. And as the solar eclipse finishes, we can see that the nodal line is moving Central Australia and beyond. And as the eclipse finishes, it's pretty much near West Australia. So this is a fascinating solar eclipse, but I just find it interesting how we get the initial start of the solar eclipse as it begins, the moon shadow coming through the chromatics. Saturn and Neptune are moving across the chromatics, and we get this interaction, which is quite interesting. And importantly, this line is moving quite rapidly, whereas in astrocartography, this line moves quite slowly. So if I move it on a daily basis, it moves very slowly across New Zealand, and it may take 3 or 4 months to move across to the other side of Australia, where it's only taken a few minutes with the solar eclipse. So I do feel that there is a mathematical way we can look at it. We can see that the node and Venus are in interaction in this point, and just prior to the solar eclipse, Sun and Saturn have made their opposition. So this is very, very important. Now I do feel that Sun and Saturn will be linked into a possible future event with this solar eclipse, and especially when Sun and Saturn interact at square with the node may be the release point. And I do feel that this is quite important, as it may represent a strong earthquake either north of New Zealand or potentially a strong earthquake south of New Zealand. Now, just summarising this video, I do feel that the upcoming solar eclipse of 2025 has a very strong relationship and mirrored symmetry back to the 1986 solar eclipse. Both partial solar eclipses are both foreshadows for strong events. Now, we had strong earthquakes in both locations of Australia and New Zealand back in 1986 through 1989, and we get some very interesting symmetry when we look at the adjacent solar eclipse of 1985 into 1986, and the upcoming 2025 and 2026 solar eclipses may also represent foreshadows for a strong event to come. Now, the 1985 solar eclipse had a very strong earthquake south of New Zealand, Macquarie Islands, magnitude 8.2, and this may be an echo of what's to come just south of Australia in 2027 or 2028. Potentially a strong earthquake of similar magnitude, around 8 magnitude, west of the Macquarie Islands, could be something to keep a close note of, as well as strong events potentially, again, for Tennant Creek. So something to watch. And we have seen the Newcastle region experience some strong earthquakes over the last 6 months, and this may be another event to come as well for the region. Now, I've gone back with Astrocartography and looked at the Tennant Creek region and found a very significant Saturn station that occurred back in 2021. Now we can see that there's some very strong aspects with Saturn and Uranus being at square, and the Sun is also having an interaction with Jupiter on this day, almost at perfect square as well. This is the first thing that caught my attention, and just not long after the Saturn station, we have an opposition between Mars and Saturn in perfect square aspect with Uranus. So this is an extremely powerful time frame, also in 2021, and I do feel that this is a future event to come, and this is due to the Saturn station in 2021. Now, I do feel if we use the solar eclipse information as well as astrocartography and use them in conjunction, we can come up with some very interesting locations that could see some strong earthquake events with great accuracy. Now, I do feel that the station of Saturn in 2021 and the opposition of Mars and Saturn that followed not long after while connected into Uranus may actually give us a foreshadow for a future time frame to watch for the Tennant Creek region. And I've come up with August, late August of 2027 as this perfect reflection time frame for this event for Tennant Creek. We get the opposition of Mars-Saturn, and we get another planetary alignment between Sun-Jupiter taking place just a day prior, and importantly, Uranus is connected hard into the nodes. So this will be the key time frame to watch in August of 2027 for another event for Tennant Creek for the Australian region. If we look back at the 1989 May 23 earthquake, magnitude 8.2, that struck the Macquarie Ridge, very large earthquake, there was a series of planetary alignments taking place at the same time. Sun, Mercury were in conjunction, as well as Venus and Jupiter. Very significant planetary alignments, and also an opposition between Mars and Saturn. Now, if we have a look at Saturn, Saturn's within 2 degrees of Neptune. This is exactly where we find ourselves right now in 2025. There's about 1.5 degrees separation between both planets, and we get this same symmetry again. And looking ahead, we may see another time frame where we get a powerful event just south of New Zealand around the Macquarie Islands. Now, I've come up with 2 possible time frames where a future event could be possible, and we're now looking again at the same time frame that I've just previously mentioned for the Tennant Creek around late August of 2027, where we get Sun-Jupiter in conjunction. We actually see them visually with astrocartography right over the Macquarie Islands itself, with the opposition of Mars and Saturn and Uranus connected into the node. This is the key time frame that I'm worried about the Tennant Creek region, but it's also showing itself quite strongly just south of New Zealand. But the other key date will also be in April of 2027. This time we get the conjunction of Sun and Saturn while connected into a very significant nodal aspect, as well as Jupiter connected into the node as well. So this will be the key time frame that I'll be concerned with for the Macquarie Islands around April of 2027. And importantly, we have the Sun-Saturn connection and conjunction, which is exactly what's taking place at the start of the 2025 solar eclipse. And that concludes this video with the related symmetry of the upcoming 2025 and 2026 solar eclipses. That leads us back into a symmetry of the 1985 and 1986 solar eclipses. I do feel that represents strong earthquake events across the New Zealand and the Australian region in the years to come. For more information, please visit solarwatcher.net and quakewatcher.com, where there will be more information for members and subscribers, as well as website newsletters and astrocartography videos. Thanks for watching.